Welcome to the MrpTech podcast. This is episode number 23. My name is Matt, and this is a weekly podcast where I review multiple platforms and technologies to see which works best for me in order to help you. Last week, I created a video on YouTube that reviewed the Solus-Project or Solus-OS. And in today's episode of the MrpTech podcast, I'm going to continue my thoughts on the Solus-Project. So if you haven't seen that YouTube video, the name of the video itself is MrpTechreviews Solus. And that's S-O-L-U-S. So you may want to watch that first, or if you don't want to watch that, just go ahead and keep listening. I'm not going to tell you what to do. So to give you an example of Solus and what it is, Solus is a Linux-based distribution, Linux-based operating system. And most of the reviews that I have done on Linux, as you start reviewing Linux distros, you'll find that some vary in themes, some vary in desktops, some vary in the way that software is packaged and how you download software. But basically underneath the hood, the core is the exact same. It is based off of something called the Linux kernel. Now what Linux is great about is you can customize it to a specific need. For an example, when I first got started in Linux, I had a Dell desktop that was running Windows XP. This was back in 2009. The desktop itself was about 8 years old. XP at that point for me was sort of boring. I didn't really have any problems with it, but I was looking for something different. And I came across Ubuntu Linux, and I knew absolutely nothing about it. And one day decided to give it a try. And when I did that, all of a sudden, this Dell desktop that I had that I thought was aging ran so much better than it did with XP on it. And another use case that I had for it back when I started using Linux was there was an old Dell laptop that was unusable because Windows was corrupt on it and there was no recovery disks available. And just learning about Linux, we decided to give it a try, and it extended the life of that laptop until another choice was available. Just something, a use case that Linux gave in this type of setting. And Ubuntu was fun for me because it got me excited to learn about something new. And that, as I said, was back in 2009. And Linux has changed quite a bit over the last 8 years. And mostly for the good. If you don't know anything about Linux, there are constant updates being made to the Linux kernel to make it more stable, more usable for different use cases. And to that point where there are over 1,000 changes being made per hour to the Linux kernel. So there have been many changes since 2009. And with that said, I want to continue reviewing an awesome project that I just learned about recently. Now, over the last few weeks and months, I've had a different use case come up for Linux, and that was a need to replace Chrome OS on my Chromebook. And I talked about this in the YouTube video that I made last week, and I came across the Solus-Project. If you don't know and you want to check out the Solus-Project, it's www.solus-project.com. So www.solus-project.com. And from what I have read, this is a relatively new project, probably within the last year or so has been revamped. It does go back a few more years. It's been through an evolution over the last several years. It started as Solus OS, then became Evolve OS, and then just back to Solus. And what's great about Solus is that it's written from scratch. So it's not based off of any other type of Linux. uses GTK3, so is very familiar to me, who uses GNOME and GNOME software quite a bit. So I want to talk about the good things first. As I just mentioned, it is completely different than any other type of Linux that I have used at all. It was very easy to install, much like, say, an Ubuntu or Fedora or something along those lines. Very easy to install, just asks you a few questions along the way, and before you know it, you're up and running. It's very modern looking. If you saw the video, it looks a lot like Windows 10, in my opinion. The Budgie desktop is probably one of the nicest looking desktops that I have come across recently. It's familiar in the fact that there's a lot of the GNOME settings that are available to you, but it is very lightweight, and that's one of the things that has saved my Chromebook from being recycled. So with this modern look, I think it takes like the idea of Windows 10 and simplifies it so that you don't have all of the crazy live menus and things like that nobody really uses in Windows 10, and creates a very stable desktop environment to just get work done. Because it was lightweight, my Chromebook now flies faster than I think I have ever seen it. And I have had Linux on it in the past, and it worked great. But some of the more recent desktop environments, such as GNOME, were a little power hungry on my Chromebook, and I just didn't have enough resources. It sort of got bogged down anytime I wanted to do some work on it. Well, with Solus and the Solus-Project, now I have a usable Linux distribution on my Chromebook. The Raven notification panel, as I mentioned in the video, is very nice looking, very sleek. It has a lot of options, and the software for Solus is optimized to run well on Solus. So applications load fast. This software center is probably one of the best software centers that I have ever seen. It is clean and easy to use, easy to manage, and just the overall look is really beautiful and fun. It's different for me than in any other Linux distribution that I've used, so I wanted to learn more about it. So as I tested this out for the last week or so, I came across a couple of different situations that really made me test the limits of Solus and see where I could bring it. One of the first things that I did after the Chromebook is I wanted to run Solus in VirtualBox. And I have a system set up where I can install Linux distributions in VirtualBox. And for the most part, I haven't had any problems installing Linux in VirtualBox. Except for this case, when I tried to install Solus in VirtualBox, for some reason it would crash anytime that I tried to install it. I'm not really sure why that is. It could be various things. And I haven't quite given up on that yet. I did have the latest version of VirtualBox, so maybe in the next future release, Solus will be able to be installed in VirtualBox. I'm not really sure what would have caused that. But just something in case anybody was wanting to test it out in VirtualBox. You may have different results. Give it a shot and let me know. The other thing that I noticed with Solus is even though the software is optimized and made to run better on Solus than, say, other Linux distributions, it did have limited software available. Now, what I mean by that is I don't mean that in a negative way, per se, because every piece of software that I use was available in the store. So major things like open source software like GIMP or Audacity or Kodi, VLC, a lot of the software that I've covered in these podcasts is available in that software store. And as an example, I just want to talk about one thing on my Chromebook that wasn't quite working the way that I wanted it to. And in the past, I've had this issue in other distributions where I could not use the brightness keys on my keyboard. And in GNOME, in the system panel, if you click on it from the top, you can actually adjust the brightness with basically one click, and you're adjusting the brightness. In the Raven panel, I see the volume notification, but there is no brightness indicator there. So the brightness indicator is actually buried in the settings, which I could still get to, and it wasn't really a problem. But normally I can map the keys on my keyboard using some additional software, and then I'll have keyboard shortcuts to adjust my brightness. And it was just little things like that. I couldn't find the software. As X2Do is the name of the software that allows me to make custom key maps to keyboard shortcuts, such as the brightness indicators. So that was just one little thing, and it's not really a major thing because I could adjust the brightness, and it was very easy to do. But something to think about in the future, that Raven panel is such a nice setup. Why can't they have a brightness indicator in that panel? Because the volume is already there. Maybe it's a technical thing. Maybe it's something that's going to be added in the future. I'm not really sure. The other thing that I was wondering about, and I mentioned this in the video, is that because I'm on a Chromebook, the trackpad is sort of cheap on this Chromebook, and I was expecting to sort of be able to tab my way through the application menu and go through all of the software, just hitting the tab button or using my arrow keys to go up and down and left and right between all the different menus, so that I could use the keyboard only instead of using a trackpad or a mouse. And that I didn't seem to have support for on my Chromebook. So again, that's just a really little thing, and I struggled to find anything negative to say about the Solus-Project. So those are just a couple of things, and I really have to say that this might be the Linux distro for my Chromebook that will stay on it for a while. It has been super stable. I have not had any problems whatsoever. I did have to learn a few things about Solus that I have never seen in other Linux distributions before. Managing updates was a little bit different. But overall, I would say that this is something worth checking out if you've never tried Linux before. Normally, I would say start with something like Ubuntu or Linux Mint, but I think the Solus-Project is something that someone could try Linux for the first time and have a system up and running and stable without much effort. If you're looking for lots of crazy, unique types of software, Solus is probably not for you just yet. That might be coming in the future as the project grows. There might be more software available. But I want to talk about what this has made me start thinking, and I want to thank Solus for doing, because as I start reviewing all these different Linux distros, as I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of them tend to be the same. A lot of them tend to be just a theme change or a different desktop setup, but under the hood, it's all the same. But with Solus, it sort of reignited that excitement that I had when I was first learning Linux, about putting it on my old Dell desktop or saving a computer that couldn't boot into Windows anymore. And in this case, what it has done is it really sort of energized me to start learning more about Linux again, because I like to learn how things work. And Linux is something that I've taught myself. I knew nothing about, and I've always been good with computers, but learning how the system works is kind of fun for me. And Solus, since it was built from scratch, I've had in the back of my mind for the longest time about building my own Linux distribution from scratch. And that is called the Linux from Scratch project. And I've downloaded the Linux from Scratch book, and over the last few years, I have thought on and on about doing this. It does take a lot of time to do, so I'm not sure exactly when that will be, but I would like to build my own Linux distribution at some point in time as a learning project, not as something to use or to sell or to distribute to other people, but it is more along the lines of just learning more about how this whole system is set up. And in the meantime, I've realized that there was another way that I could get into building my own Linux distribution. That was customizing something like Ubuntu, which the company behind Ubuntu allows you to do. You can customize and tweak and change and redistribute a Linux distro based on Ubuntu without having to do a lot of the from scratch work. And I found the info on how to do this. The steps looked very easy to follow. And I actually tried to do this yesterday, I believe. I tried to do this. And everything was working great. And I was following the step-by-step process. And I was building my own Ubuntu distribution until it came to the point where I could install my own packages, and for some reason I couldn't do that. And I'm not sure why that happened, why the package manager wasn't working at that point, but again, this is all a learning process. And so I may end up trying a few different things and see if that works, and sort of taking baby steps to creating my own operating system. And why would I want to do that? It's not because I'm a masochist. It's because I want to learn how these things work. And I want to, by building and making mistakes, I learn and I gain experience. And that's the whole point of doing this for me. That's the whole point of doing this podcast. And Linux for me is still about learning something new. And Solus brought about that same feeling when I first discovered Linux, that wow, there's something different out there, and wow, I can learn new things or try new projects and not spend any major money doing all of this. It's a enthusiast way of learning and just figuring out how things work and tweaking systems to do certain neat things, like work on a Chromebook or work on an old desktop or work on a laptop that wasn't being able to boot before because Windows was on it. So hopefully you sort of understand why I think Linux is important, because there are use cases for everyone out there. You don't have to be a computer geek to use Linux. And that's sort of what I'm trying to come across is, if you would like help, if you have an old computer at home that doesn't work properly, as long as it's not a hardware issue, you can bring it back to life for things like media storage, or you can turn a laptop into a digital photo frame using Linux. And if you would like help trying Linux for the first time, contact me. It's mrptechreviews@gmail.com. If you have any questions on Solus or the Solus-Project, feel free to send it my way. I did have a comment earlier this week on the YouTube video that I made, and someone was excited to try Solus on their laptop. And that's fun for me to hear those comments, because even if I'm just getting to one person, then I know that these videos are worth it. And if you've tried things that I've reviewed, let me know, and I can help you out. I can continue down the road. I can continue doing these or do follow-ups on things that I have reviewed, and really would like the feedback. So if you have feedback for me, send me an email, mrptechreviews@gmail.com. You can also check my Facebook page out. It's facebook.com/mrptechreviews. And this is a weekly podcast. I try to do Wednesday releases. Sometimes I'm a little early, sometimes I'm a little late. And there are always new projects in the works. So as time goes on, I'm going to review more products, more operating systems, more technologies, all just because I like to learn about these things, so that one day in the future when somebody asks for help, I have those answers, or multiple answers for people to try to see if it works for them. And if I can help those people, then that's what makes this worth doing. So thanks so much for listening to this podcast. We will see you next time.